Good morning, team. Thank you so much for joining us. It is Tuesday, May 17th. I'm Amy Corr, and I'm joined by Kevin Van Eck, and we're live out of the Goose Island office. So we're hearing lots of conversation out there right now about the shift in the market, things that are happening, what we need to know to be ready. So we want you to grab your coffee, your tea, power smoothie, lemon water, whatever it is you need this morning to jump in and make it a great Tuesday with us. And let's jump into the next episode of Coffee with Amy and Kevin.
Yes, that's right. Good morning, Amy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Really, we're going to cover three things today that we all need to be comfortable with talking about. And hopefully at a basic level, but really, ideally at a more advanced level. So we're going to cover those three things. It really stems from a lot of the headlines and noise that are out there. We know that we're reading the headlines, we see them, but we also know that our clients are as well. So what are some of those headlines that we're seeing? Because some of them are pretty dramatic.
Yeah, they're kind of crazy. Inventory hits the lowest level, just the lowest level. Crazy. Boom versus bubble. Which one is it? And housing affordability hits the lowest point in 13 years. These are just three of so many of the different headlines we were looking at the other day. And if they're confusing to us, just imagine how confusing they are to the people that you know, to consumers out there. So it's really all about us making sure that we can clear up the confusion.
Yeah, and it also elevates us as a true advisor. If we can understand how to speak to these three things, they're going to be home appreciation, inflation, and also affordability. Not necessarily in that order.
That's right, because we're going to talk about inflation first. And I don't know if many of you have been noticing it, but I feel like I'm hearing about it everywhere. Last week on the Today Show, they did a 30-minute segment on inflation. I heard it yesterday on the 5 o'clock news. So we're definitely feeling the effects of what is happening in the economy right now as it pertains to inflation. But I want to just take a step back and make sure we're really understanding why this is happening. So back in 2020, when the pandemic hit, one of the things that the government recognized that it needed to do is it couldn't have the economy slow down. That would have been terrible, right? But people weren't able to work, things weren't able to happen because of the pandemic. So what the government did is they decided to print money, and they basically fueled our economy with a lot of cash so that people could go out and continue to spend. So it allowed us to keep some of these restaurants and different stores as alive as we could. So fast forward, we've got a lot of cash, we've got a lot of money that we can spend, and then tie that to the fact that rates were at such an all-time low. You were able to borrow for nothing. So it was super cheap, so people were out there spending, which is what the government wanted us to do. But now fast forward, here we are 2 years later, and we've got a housing market where we've got no inventory, and we're really struggling with how to balance it out because it was so easy for people to buy houses, right? So all of this cash is out there. Now what we're seeing happening is the government is recognizing they need to pull back and slow it down because all of this spending is creating inflation. When we've got all of this cash in our market, then all of a sudden the consumer goods are going to start costing more money, right? Because if people are out spending, what are all the stores going to do? They're going to start raising their prices. So we're starting to feel the effects of that right now. So basically what we're seeing here is the idea that now things are starting to cost more for us. And what the Fed had to do is to slow the economy down. They decided they were going to modify rates. So now all of a sudden we saw at the beginning of this year, rates were at what? Middle 3%, maybe even lower than that.
Right.
Now, I just took a look at it this morning. Rates are at 5.77% for a 30-year conforming loan. So if you take a look at this first slide that we've got, they talk about how in calculated risk, Bill McBride said the 30-year fixed mortgage will likely peak between 5 and 5.7%, and we're going to see some variability in the relationship to that. So we might actually see rates as high as the low 6% rate. I think we need to be ready for that. I think we're going to continue to see rates going up, and it's because right now what we're also seeing is that things are costing so much, right? We're starting to see eggs, fuel. How much are you loading up on gasoline right now? Flights. I just purchased flights to New York, and they were double the amount that they normally would have been. Wow. So what's happening though is inflation is making everything more expensive. So now it's costing more to buy a home, but it's also costing more to live. And when you take a look at this second slide, it shows that the average consumer is spending an additional $429 monthly for items other than shelter. So this is actually showing that it costs more now just to live because of inflation and the impacts of that. Meanwhile, average weekly wages rose just $212 per month. So the problem that we're seeing here is that yes, inflation is going up, but the amount we're making is not matching that. So ultimately, that is going to create this shift. It's going to do what the Fed ultimately wants, though. It's going to slow our economy down so that we don't see hyperinflation and we can hopefully get back to a more normalized state of the economy without being really careful, making sure that we don't halt it. So it's a really delicate balance of trying to make sure that we manage how much it costs to live with how much inflation is happening. So overall, what this does mean, though, is it's going to cost more for a buyer to purchase. So odds are they're going to have to reduce how much they can actually spend on a home. Really important to understand how inflation is impacting not just home ownership, but affordability overall.
Yeah, super important to understand it. We all feel it, but being able to describe it, understand it, and how it can impact our clients and our business, also important. So we talked about inflation. Number two, let's talk about home price appreciation. And with this, one of the things we're going to show you in a second is what's happened to appreciation since 1945. Why do we start there? Well, it was the end of World War II. And at that time, the government did something similar to what Amy just described, where in order to get the economy back post-World War II, they infused a ton of cash into the markets. So there were all these incentives. It really was the first housing boom of the modern era. And what happened is we made it easier for people to buy homes, especially with all of the VA programs and other things that were going on in the communities across America, being able to make it easier to be a home owner. So in the chart we're going to pull up, what we're going to see is that appreciation was steady up through and until 2006. And then we see a dip here, and then again, steady home price appreciation up until today. So why are we looking at this chart? It's important to understand what happened at each point. In 1945, we already said the government infused the market with a ton of cash. In 2006, after the dip happened. Why? Because there were loose lending guidelines and people were taking equity out of their homes. And so when price appreciation stopped and the values of homes went down, we found a lot of homes underwater, a lot of homeowners underwater where because of the equity they took out or because of the inflated pricing that they were paying and loose lending guidelines, they couldn't cover the shortfall between the value and what they owed. Well, let's talk about how that is happening now. We don't necessarily see that because there are stricter guidelines in place when it comes to lending. Let's talk about the second piece here when we talk, and I'm going to pull up another chart. When we talk about forbearance, now at the beginning of the year and late last year, there was a lot of concern about the forbearance programs ending. Well, what does this mean? A forbearance means that a homeowner is able to push the balance on their loan into the future so they don't need to essentially pay their mortgage now. There was some concern that a lot of these properties were going to fall into either short sale or foreclosure. And with the number of properties that were in forbearance programs, that would have been a big concern had a majority of them done so. In the chart that you're looking at right here, it looks like over 80% of the homes that were in forbearance are no longer a concern. What would have happened had they all gone into foreclosure? Well, it would have flooded the market with inventory. We're experiencing low inventory. If that number of homes went into the market, it would have flooded and potentially stopped home price appreciation. So as we're looking at this graph here, no concern. And then let's talk about the future of appreciation over the next year and into the future. I think we'll take a look at a chart that takes us through 2026. Well, there's 7 specific forecasting groups that led to this average of 9% appreciation throughout 2022. So we're obviously in May currently. What they're expecting for the entire year of 2022 was 9% appreciation. And then we see in the 3s moving forward up through 2026. Well, here's what's cool. 3 doesn't sound like a lot of appreciation, but if we look at a graph that we've looked at over time, what's interesting is the average appreciation from 1890 until today has been 3%. That's a normal market, 3.5% in the 3 to 4 range. So when we look at appreciation, we're not seeing a dip. We're not seeing depreciation. We're not seeing this bubble burst. What we are seeing is possibly a return to normalcy.
Yeah, I mean, normalcy, we probably all would be happy with that in some regards. And I would say the one thing too with pricing, and we talked about it on another coffee episode, is for all of us, one of the big indicators we can always be looking at is month supply of inventory. Because at the end of the day, appreciation is happening because there just is not enough housing for the demand out there. So whoever is out there buying has to pay up in order to be one of the lucky winners of purchasing a house, right? So I think that's the other thing for us, especially as real estate experts, is to really look at month supply of inventory. As we see that shift at some point, that could be one of the first indicators that we may be seeing a more normalized market. But I do think it's going to probably be a little while. And so the last thing that we really want to focus on is this idea of affordability. You know, I think it's one of the biggest challenges that so many buyers are faced with right now. And I think what we have to recognize is that it is hard to afford a home now, and we are going to see probably at the entry level first time home buyer market that there are going to be some people that unfortunately might have to sit on the sidelines. They might have to hit a point where it is just too much for them to buy the house that they wanted to buy because rates have gone up, right? Or they just decide that maybe they have to readjust their expectation of what home buying is. And I want to show you something that really clarifies the difference of the impact on the increase in mortgages. The first slide that I'm going to show you right here focuses on what the change in mortgage payment is from the same house. If somebody had purchased it in January of 2021, it was a loan amount of $300,000 with principal and interest payments, and it was 20% down. Last year, to buy that home with an average rate of 2.73%, it was $1,221. Now, fast forward October, they're assuming October of 2022, based off of where they think the payment's going to be, $1,703. That is roughly a $500 increase in the mortgage payment of a $300,000 house.
Wild.
So now convert that to whatever market you might be in right now. If you've got people at 500, 750, over $1 million, think about how that is really impacting the increase in their monthly payment. And at some point, let's all face it, there's only so much, as I referred to before, money coming in. And if we are not seeing an increase in salaries to match that, there are going to be those people that are going to have to pull out. The problem, or the thing to really recognize, is that affordability is really approaching historical levels. This second slide that I want to show you, you can see all of the bars in orange. Those are really focusing on the months where we had distressed properties dominating the market. We don't have distressed properties anymore. So we are really seeing appreciation, prices moving up, and with that perfect storm or dynamic of just not enough inventory, let's face it, you know, buyers that can buy are pushing the pricing up, and we just have to be able to recognize that right now. So here's the thing that I want you also to think about is that if you are working with buyers right now, I can tell you I've seen instances where people have started their home search process and they think that their rate is going to be at a certain amount. They finally find the house that they like. They go back to lock it in with their lender and they see that their rate has gone up a half a point or 1%. And you know what it does? It changes their ability to move forward with that home. So one of the things that we can do as an agent right now is make sure we are really in contact with the lender that our buyer is working with. And proper rate, you know, obviously our close aligned lender has a really great program. I'm hoping many of you are already taking advantage of it. It's called the lock and roll. And what this allows you to do is you get your buyer qualified with a lender through proper rate. And then what they can do is they can actually lock a rate in for 90 days, even if they have not found the home that they are going to move forward on. Now that has traditionally not been an option, but this is a great way for you to lock in at whatever rate it is now. And of course, if rates go down, you can always readjust to that, but it protects you from rates getting too high. So you can lock and roll. So you lock it in and then you roll and you figure out how to find the house that your buyers want to get into, which is really impactful. Then they find it and they've already got that rate secured. So really important, because we need to recognize that I think this is going to be a dynamic for a while. And in order to put our buyers in the right position, we need to make sure we're taking the right steps. And then the last slide that I just want to end with here is it shows new data from a poll, a Harris poll, that shows 84% of Americans plan to cut back on spending as a result of the price hikes. Remember what I was talking about earlier, whether it was gas, baby formula, which many people can't even find, eggs, milk, you name it. More than 70% of respondents said they're feeling the effects of inflation, and that they're feeling it not just in buying a house, but in things like groceries and gas. So this is going to be here for a little while. So we really need to make sure we understand these dynamics so we can help our buyers and our sellers understand the dynamics in the market and make great choices. So on that note, I know that's a lot to digest today, but we hope some of these slides, which are courtesy of Keeping Current Matters, which we didn't mention earlier, are really great. Their monthly update for May is really impactful. We took a couple of the key nuggets, but feel free to look at the whole thing. There's some additional information and more slides on some of these key topics.
Yep. And what happens a lot of times, we read the headlines, but we don't read beyond that. We don't actually understand what's happening. And so when our clients ask us questions, we want to make sure that we can actually respond with detail. We understand what's happening with inflation, what's happening with price appreciation, what's happening with pricing, what's happening when it comes to everything that happens in our industry. So take the time to learn about it. Use these slides that we're sharing with you and do your own research. It takes time, but it's going to elevate you as a true advisor to your clients, whether it is a client you're working with now or a future client you can impress by being able to be knowledgeable about the market when they ask you what's happening.
That's right. And I remember the wrap of KCM, it said you need to have relevant market information based on facts, not just your opinion, right? So make sure that you're learning the facts. And on that note, there was so much data, I was holding it in my hand, but I really want a sip of my coffee now this morning. So we hope you all make it a great Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining us. Until we talk to you next week, remember, you got this.